The flood came in the way Colorado floods come, not with warning, but with the particular sound of something wrong upstream before the water itself arrived. I was bringing the last of the chickens to the barn when I heard it. The creek going from ordinary to something else entirely in the space of 3 seconds, and then the water was at the fence post, and then over it, and I ran for the barn, with the last chicken tucked under my arm and the particular absence of thought that means your body has taken over the decision-making. I did not see Nate Barrow until I had the barn door half closed behind me and turned to push the bolt. And there he was on the same side of the door, soaking wet, with his horse already tied at the far rail. I said the first thing that came to mind. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "The same thing you're doing." And then he helped me push the bolt because the barn door was beginning to move against us from the wind, and between us we got it closed. And we stood in the barn with the sound of the flood outside and the animals going loud with their discomfort. I said, "This changes nothing about the creek," he said. I know, that was how 2 days started. My name is Ruth Calvert. I have run the Calvert place since my husband Martin left in the autumn of 1875. Not died, left, which is a different wound, and in some ways a more complicated one. Because the dead cannot send you a letter in October explaining themselves, and the living sometimes do. He went to Denver with a woman he had met the previous spring, and the letter he sent was, I will give him credit for this, honest about both the fact and the reason. I burned the letter and spent 2 hours in the barn doing unnecessary work, and in the morning started making the calculations for how to run 140 acres alone. I had been making those calculations for 4 years by the time the flood came, and I had gotten very good at them. 4 years is long enough to understand what a farm actually requires, and long enough to stop being surprised by how much of it you can manage alone when the alternative is not managing it. I had learned to do things I had not done before. The heavy fence work, because I couldn't afford to hire it out. The channel maintenance, because no one else understood the irrigation system as well as I did, and an incorrect repair would have cost me more than the cost of learning to do it right myself. The negotiations at the county office that Martin had handled because he was better with bureaucrats than I was, which had been true until I had enough practice that the bureaucrats stopped being surprised to see me and started simply dealing with me as the person with authority over the Calvert place, which I was. I had also learned what I could not manage and what that meant. I could not afford to lose a summer without the creek. The irrigation system was the difference between a farm that produced enough and a farm that did not produce enough. And in the margin between those two things was the difference between staying and having to sell. I was not going to sell. I had decided this in the weeks after Martin left with the particular clarity of a decision. You arrive at not through deliberation, but through the simple recognition that there is only one acceptable answer. I was not going to sell, and the creek was not going to be taken. 4 years is long enough to understand what a farm actually requires, and long enough to stop being surprised by how much of it you can manage on your own when the alternative is not managing it. I had learned to do things I had not done before: the heavy fence work, the channel maintenance, the negotiations at the county office that Martin had always handled because he was better at patience with bureaucrats than I was, and because in 1875, county offices did not expect to negotiate with women. They had learned to negotiate with me. We had all made adjustments. The farm worked because of the creek. The Calvert Creek, which was not named for us, we had named ourselves for it, which Martin thought was romantic and which I thought was simply practical, since the creek was the reason we had bought this particular land and not the next parcel ran along the north edge of my property and fed the irrigation system we had dug in the second summer. 300 feet of channel dug by 2 people with shovels in the worst July of my life, lined with river stone to prevent seepage, moving 12,000 gallons of water a day to fields that would otherwise grow very little worth growing. Martin had called it our insurance policy. I had continued paying the premiums after he left, including repairing the second section when it washed out in the spring of 1877 and relining the North Channel when the stone shifted. I knew every foot of it the way you know every foot of something you have built and repaired with your own hands. The Holt Ranch, 320 acres to my north and west, the largest operation in the county by a significant margin, drew from the same creek. Calvin Holt had filed an upstream water claim 11 years before I arrived, which under Colorado's prior appropriation doctrine made him the prior appropriator, which meant that in a drought year his claim outranked mine. This had been a theoretical concern for 4 years because we had not had a drought year. Then the spring of 1879 came in dry, and in May I received a letter from Nate Barrow, the Holt Ranch foreman, explaining that the ranch would be drawing at maximum capacity through the summer and that my downstream usage might be affected. I sent a letter back that was legally specific and professionally worded, and that said, in the precise language of water law, that I disputed both the scope of the Holt claim and its application to my downstream use under current conditions. He sent a letter back that matched mine in specificity and professionalism and said, in the same precise language, that the Holt Ranch's position was as stated. We had exchanged 7 letters in 6 months. I had formed a clear and unfavorable opinion of Nate Barrow based on those letters, a man who argued the law without acknowledging the human cost of it, who wrote with the particular smoothness of someone who has been trained to say what needs saying without saying what he thinks. I had seen him twice at the county office on the same business, and we had been civil in the way of adversaries who know that civility costs nothing and concedes nothing, and I had not looked at him long enough to form any impression beyond that. Now I was looking at him for the 3rd time. In my barn, in a flood, and he was taller than I had registered, and his eyes were a specific shade of blue that was direct without being aggressive, and his right forearm had a long pale scar that caught the barn light. When his wet sleeve rolled back, he was not what the letters had made him. The letters had made him a legal instrument, precise, smooth, arguing the law without acknowledging what the law, applied this way, would actually cost a downstream operation. I had formed from those letters an impression of a man who had decided that doctrine mattered more than circumstance, that prior appropriation was right and anything else was sentiment, that the Holt Ranch's technical superiority of claim was sufficient justification for its full enforcement. The man in my barn was not that. I was being forced to update my records in real time. A man who had come to check a creek level for his employer on the morning of a flash flood and had not made it back before the water rose, and who was now wet and practical about it, and who was, I noted in spite of myself, competent with the horse. He checked his horse before he did anything else. That was the first thing I noted that was not already in the letters. We worked the first hour in parallel. Silence. Me settling the chickens and checking the cow. Him doing something with his wet saddle and then moving to help with my second horse without asking. Which I let him do because the horse was agitated and he was clearly competent with it. The barn was not large. With 2 horses, a cow, 11 chickens, and 2 wet people, it was adequately full. And the fullness kept us on different ends of it through most of the first hour. I had run out of separate tasks by the second hour. I sat on the bench near the tack wall with my damp coat beginning to make me cold and watched the rain through the east window gap. The water outside was at the fence line and climbing. I calculated an inch an hour at current pace, the barn doors on grade. The south sillboards I had replaced in March. Nate said, "There's food in my saddlebag." "If you want it," I said. "I'm not hungry." He said, "All right." He went back to what he had been doing, which I now saw was systematically checking the barn's structural points, the sillboards, the corner posts, the overhead beams. He was being methodical about it in the way of a man who has decided to understand the problem before it decided anything for him. I watched him do this and found, against my preference, that it was a sensible approach. I said, "The south sillboards are solid. I replaced them in March." He looked at me. He said, "Good. That gives us more time before we'd need to elevate anything." He was talking about the animals. I said, "How long do you think it'll hold?" He looked at the east gap, calculated something I could not see him calculate, said, "Depending on what's upstream, probably through the night at minimum." "Possibly longer." I said, "Through the night?" He said, "Yes." I looked at the water, at the fence line, and then at the chicken crates, and then at the cow, who was expressing her opinion of the situation with considerable volume. And I made a series of adjustments to my understanding of what this evening was going to look like. He produced food from his saddlebag an hour later, dried beef, 2 biscuits that were only slightly softened by the wet, a small tin flask of cold coffee. He set these on the workbench between us with the manner of a man making a practical decision rather than a social one, which I appreciated and therefore accepted. We ate. He poured coffee into the flask's tin cup and passed it across without asking. I drank and passed it back. After a while he said, "I know the creek matters." I said, "Then you know why the correspondence has been the way it's been." He said, "I know why yours was. Mine was what it was because Mr. Holt sets the position and I write the letters." I looked at him. He was looking at the lantern between us on the workbench, the flame of it steady in the barn's stillness. I said, "You disagree with the position." He said, "I think prior appropriation is the right doctrine for arid country. And I think it's been applied in this situation in a way that's technically legal and practically damaging to an operation that can't sustain a dry summer without downstream access." I said, "That's a very specific opinion to leave out of 7 letters." He said, "It's not my place to put my disagreements in letters I write on behalf of an employer." I thought about this. It was a position I understood from the inside, the gap between what you believe and what your situation requires you to do. I had been angry at the letters and at the man behind them, and I had not separated those 2 things as carefully as I should have. I said, The creek matters because my husband and I built the irrigation system ourselves. He left in 1875. The creek it's the part of the farm that has his work in it the way. The rest of it doesn't anymore. I understand that's not a legal argument, he said. No. But it's the true one. The rain came heavier again before dark, which pushed the water to within 6 inches of the barn's south door. We worked together to move the cow to the loft landing, higher ground. Inside the barn, which required 2 people and a good deal of patience, and the particular negotiation that takes place between humans and a cow who has decided she doesn't want to go anywhere. We managed it. The cow continued to express her disapproval from the loft landing, but at least she was dried out. We ate the second half of the food in the evening, rationed correctly because neither of us knew how long we were going to need it. Nate had a small store of grain for his horse and shared the excess with mine, which was practical and which I thanked him for specifically rather than generally, because he had done a specific thing and deserved a specific acknowledgement. Before the first night was over, he asked me something I had not expected. He said, "How long have you been running the farm alone?" I said, 4 years. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "The irrigation system. You said you and your husband built it." He left? I said, "In 1875. Yes. He said nothing for a while. Then, "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be. It sorted itself out." He looked at me in the lantern light. He said, "You built something that's substantial alone after he left." I said, "The original channel was already there. I've done the repairs and 1 full replacement of the north section." He said, "That's not a small thing." I said, "No. It's about $12,000 of productive capacity per growing season, which is why the water rights matter." He said, "I know why the water rights matter." And then we were quiet again. But it was a different quiet than the first hour. The quiet of 2 people who have said some of the true things and are deciding whether to say more. The first night passed slowly. I slept for 3 or 4 hours on the bench with my coat over me and Martin's old barn coat under my head. And when I woke, Nate was awake on the opposite bench with the lantern turned low. He had checked the water level at what he estimated was 2 in the morning. He told me it had peaked and was holding. He told me this calmly, in the manner of someone who has decided to be responsible for the situation, whether or not it is technically his situation to be responsible for. I said, "You should have slept." He said, "I'm fine." I said, "That's not what I asked." He almost smiled. He said, "I'll sleep now." "Thank you." He slept. I sat with the low lantern and the sound of the water holding at the sill and thought about the creek and about the letters and about the compta difference between the man in the letters and the man on the other bench, and concluded that they were the same man in different circumstances, and that I had been reading the circumstances as character when they were only circumstances. The second day came in with lighter rain, but the water still high. Nate was right. It had peaked in the night, but the runoff from the higher ground east of us would keep the level up through most of the day. We were not leaving until tomorrow. I had made a practice, in 4 years of managing things alone, of accepting the unchangeable. This was something I had learned the hard way. In the weeks after Martin left, when I had spent energy on the fact of his leaving rather than on the farm that still needed running, and the farm had suffered for it, and I had decided not to repeat the error. I accepted the flood in the barn and the day ahead of us with the equanimity of someone who has no useful alternative, and I went to work that the second day had its own quality. We had slept separately, briefly in the way that people sleep when they are cold, and a little hungry and have been, running on adrenaline, and in the morning the barn had the particular quality of a space that too people have occupied overnight, and that has taken on their presence. The animals had settled. The rain had stopped. The water outside was still high, but had stopped rising. We did not talk much in the early morning. We each moved through our own requirements. I checked the animals. He checked his horse, and then we fell into the work of the second day with the ease of people who have, the night before, arrived at something like an understanding. Not an agreement, not a resolution of anything, just the specific ease of two people who have stopped pretending they are strangers. We moved the horse hay to the loft corner and checked the sill, boards, and redistributed the chicken crates, and did the miscellaneous work of a barn that has not been prepared for an extended stay. We worked without much conversation for the first few hours, and the working together had a quality I had not had in a barn for 4 years, which was the quality of not being the only person responsible for what happened. It was, I noted without examining it, a relief in the afternoon, when the rain had stopped and the water was beginning the slow drop of a crest past. I borrowed his coat to check the southboards from outside. It was warmer than mine, which was dry by then, and I was only going out for 5 minutes, and he was on the other end of the barn when I took it from the nail. The letter was in the inside pocket, folded but not sealed. I would not have read it except that I was pulling the coat on and felt the paper and drew it out thinking it was something else, and had it open enough to see the letterhead before I understood what I was looking at, that it was addressed to the Colorado Water Board in Denver, written in the same hand as the 7 letters I had received, but the argument in it was not the one I had been receiving. It was careful and precisely framed, with data on downstream usage in small agricultural operations and the proportion of total creek volume represented by each usage tier. Data framed in exactly the way you would frame it if you wanted the board to look carefully at the impact on downstream users. Not an open argument for my position. The letter was too careful for that. But the architecture of the argument was not. Mr. Holtz, I read the first 3 paragraphs. Then I folded it and put it back in the pocket and went outside and checked the southboards, which were solid, and came back in and hung the coat on the nail.